I want to begin by sharing something from my beloved who passed 8 years ago, whose ashes are scattered in the ocean just beyond this space, who came and fell in love, not just with me, but with this place. And that was a really big thing for him because he grew up in South Central Los Angeles in Watts. And when he transitioned from this realm to the next, one of his oldest and dearest friends came to me and asked if I understood the most important gift that I had given Didan. And I couldn't imagine. And he said that Didan had explained to him that he was thankful for having the gift of nature, that he had not grown up in a place of spaciousness and trees and forests. And I want to begin, this is a publication, a book I did after he transitioned that I give you the springtime of my blushing heart from one of his poems. And I'd like to begin with a poem that he wrote called Healing the Whole. May the trees bear the fruit of our story. May they reveal the depths of our wounds as we cry out from the agony of our long and debilitating pain. May our gift be our yearning for the end of injustice and suffering for all abused souls. May our sacred womb blossom into a flower that heals the whole of who we are and the whole of who we can be. I got this call from Uy and I kept thinking, I mean, she gets you to do things that you haven't really thought about doing. And she gets you to do things that you had to cancel what you thought you were going to be doing in the Bay Area. And then you get what it is she wants you to talk about. And I kept thinking, I'm not a farmer. I'm not, not into agriculture. I love the forests. And so what I had to do was sit and think deeply about how to relate to the topic today of planting seeds. And I decided and I began by thinking about the intergenerational seeds that Didan and I spent so much time and energy with young people that we loved in what we called intergenerational wisdom circles. Those circles were in Oakland, they're in San Francisco. We had done some even in Africa, which I'll talk about. But it gave me an opportunity to reflect deeply. What seeds am I planting in the generations to come? And how do I begin to think about that by reflecting on what were the seeds that the elders and the mentors that I was privileged enough to know shared. And so it's in that spirit that I started to reflect on and really think about the question of seeding in that context. I grew up in San Francisco, working class family. Originally, my family had migrated from the South, as many people did during the war, to work in the war industry. That's what we came. Well, I grew up in the Methodist Church in San Francisco. And I really realized that the journey to now began back then. And in thinking about it and sitting with it, I realized as a 13-year-old in the Methodist Church, and most people know Danny Glover. I know him as not an actor. I knew him as we were in Sunday school together. And Missionary CME Church. And it was this, and it was coming of age in the 60s, which was a time of turbulence and dislocation in much the same way that this is that time. And our church had decided that some of us who were real, we taught Sunday school, we were really, present in the church, and the Black, but this is an African American church. And the African American Christian Methodists were having a conference in Chicago that our church decided to reward some of us by sending us to Chicago. And we took the Greyhound bus across. And it was interesting and eye-opening because the route that we took, we couldn't go in and eat with other people. Growing up in San Francisco, that was new to me. I'd heard about it, I'd read about it. And what was really kind of amazing to me and eye-opening was that one little town that we stopped in, and obviously Greyhound bus had telegraphed ahead and told everybody to tell everybody that there would be this bus of Black people, and they had to eat, but y'all had to figure it out. And I remember in one town that was just amazing, there was this older white man who looked like he was in his 70s and 80s, and the bus pulled up and we all started to get off the bus, and he said to the young woman with him, who probably was his daughter, "Is my God, Mamie, look what? Look at them. Where are they coming from?" And we were all kind of really looking around and really realized that he was looking at us. And you know how his daughter was trying, because he was talking loud and making a scene about it. And his daughter was trying to calm him down to, it's okay, it's okay. And then he looked again and he said, "I'll be damned, they're still coming." There were 40 of us on the bus, so it took us a while to get off. So his thing was, they're still coming. Now that was the very first time that, I kind of had that kind of experience leaving California. We get to the Methodist Youth Conference, and we're excited. There are people from all over the country. And our very first session was with somebody, a man who had been in the Army or the Air Force. And, it was a teenage group. We were all broken up into 12, 13 kind of spaces. And we were to get to know each other, and he had something to share. Well, what he had to share, he began his sharing with a question. And that question was, Do you support your country, right or wrong? Well, I thought it was a trick question. So everybody's raising their hands, and I'm like, I'm not, I mean, that's not real. That's not, it's not. Well, after 4 or 5 people had said, yes, you support your country, right or wrong, I kept waiting for the adult in the room to change, to tell them that. And then at the point at which half the people had said, and he was smiling, I realized I had to speak. And I raised my hand and I thought, I'll say what he really will say. I raised my hand and I said, well, no, you don't support your country, right or wrong. My grandmother says you don't do anything that you think is wrong. Well, that was the wrong answer. And in order to, and here I am, a 13-year-old, so excited. I'd never been out of California this far, and there's all these people. And he used me as an example of what was wrong with the country. That, of course, you support your country, right or wrong. And that this is the problem that we're dealing with right now. And I had, you're 13, you're meeting all these people, and suddenly I'm just wanting to shrink into nothingness because I became the object lesson. And of course, after that, none of the other young people wanted to have, I'd been pretty popular, but after that, nobody would speak to me. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. But what it did, and we came back home, and well, what mattered in that moment, I realized in that moment, I'd made a decision that I can't do this. And so I'm going to have to leave the Black Methodist Church if this is what it is. And so, much to my family's chagrin, I stopped teaching Sunday school. I stopped going to that church. At the same time, I was going to high school and junior high school with, people who were really into folk music and Pete Seeger and all white kids, Jewish young people. And so I kind of ended up kind of hanging out with them because they were kind of cool. So they were into the music. The long and the short of that is that's how I got involved with the Quakers. The American Friends Service Committee had in San Francisco a youth group that they had started. And I guess I've been thinking about that in terms of the seeds that were planted and who were they and how were they. And so what happened was the American Friends Service Committee, I lived a few blocks away, formed a youth group. And one of the things that happened is that the Friends organized a conference of 400 high school students from all over California to come to Monterey and to Silomar to meet a young preacher from Birmingham, Alabama, named Martin Luther King. Now, King was not, most of the white kids, I was one of 2 or 3 African-American kids on the bus that went. Most of the white kids had not heard of him. I didn't know much about him, but I have family in the South, so I knew a little more. But we were invited for the weekend, so naturally, mostly we were excited that we had an extra day off of school. It's going to be Saturday, Sunday, and Monday that we were going to go. And I've written about it, but I just want to share with you something because I feel like it's that meeting Dr. King is one of the seeds that got planted, and is one of the reasons I stand here before you today. And I realize that's a long way around. And we were so excited to be going, but we were just really excited to be hanging out. And we stopped in Palo Alto. We started in San Francisco. We stopped in Palo Alto. And this young woman got on the bus with a guitar that was larger than she was. And we had to help her with it on. And all the cool kids, now they might be in the South fighting to sit in the front of the bus. We were clear, all the cool people were on the back of the bus. We were holding down the back of the bus. And so the young woman with the guitar came to the back of the bus and started teaching us songs, and we started singing. And her name was Joan. And, you know, she was a year older than we were. And, you know, we were just cool. We were just singing, and she was practicing on this guitar. And from what I understand, it was her first guitar, and she had gotten it at Sears a few weeks earlier. And so she was bringing, so we were in the know, right? We were now her good friend. She was singing, we were singing with her. And so the long and the short, and moving forward, we get to the conference. And on the day that Dr. King was to speak, who walked out and who did they introduce as being a person who would sing before he spoke? But this one young woman, whom we later learned her last name, was Baez. And of course, we were on our feet and clapping because she was on our bus. She was our best friend. You know how that goes. And I want to, and what I want to say, and I'll just read it briefly because I've written about it and I want to get through it, but I wanted to share it. And then the moment that we had all been waiting for arrived. A very young Dr. King walked to the podium. He was 29 years old. He had just gotten his PhD from the University from Boston U a couple of years earlier. So a very young king walked to the podium. Because he was so young, his message seemed very accessible, and we listened intently as he talked about the incredible courage of young people our age in the South, the risks that they were taking, and the dangers they faced willingly to make the world a better place. He talked about Gandhi and the creative power of nonviolence. He talked about the redemptive power of love and how truth, goodness, righteousness, and love would always win out in the end. He talked about personal responsibility and the power that we each had to make a difference. I vividly remember now how at the end of his speech, he got not only a standing ovation, but we were on our feet and we were clapping and we were yelling and we were holding hands and we were crying. He had spoken to our hearts. He has spoken to our unformed visions of love and possibility. It was an extremely powerful moment, and I guess of the 400 young people, maybe there were 20 African Americans. So at the end of his speech, I rushed down because I wanted him to see me. And he had been greeting people, and he looked very surprised because I was obviously the first young African American, kid that he'd seen there. And he smiled and I smiled. And that was all I needed. I just needed him to know that we heard him. Well, in terms of planting seeds, that was a powerful one. And it was so powerful that you don't want to be on a bus with 30 teenagers who are all crying because they found their people and their friends, and now we're putting them on a bus and driving them away. So we were just like not happy, and we were crying, and we walking to each other's bus, hugging, and I mean, we had found, and we'd had this incredible experience together. We'd found our people, and now we're going to have to go back on Monday or Tuesday to the high school that we came from, where nobody understood. Well, fortunately, in terms of listening, the American Friends Service Committee staff heard us. They saw the tears, and they arranged to keep us together as a group for a year. A year in which we met once a month, and we began by doing and providing some service, picking up garbage somewhere, going to the beach and helping clear the beach, going to a neighborhood house and helping. That's how we began our monthly, once a month gathering. And the rest of the time, we sat in circle and shared with each other what was on our hearts. And we understood that we could do that because that's what we did when we met Dr. King. We sat in circle and we shared from our heart. So I just want to say that in thinking about it, one of the things that I really realized is how important the intergenerational wisdom sharing impact is. That they kept us together. They took us to forests like this forest sometimes. We were urban kids. And we would sit in the forest and we would continue to share what was in our heart. And in the Quaker tradition, of course, as many of you might know, there's silence, when people say something, you don't, interrupt, and you just listen. And I remember that I felt like I had never been listened to or heard as deeply. And I understood that I would frame it that way later. All I could do in that moment, high school, all the stuff that's going on, I knew that I felt there was a place where what I said was accepted, was respected. And so, fast forward, I went and helped organize some of my high school students, the students at my high school, to engage in the same way. So I just want to say that one of the seeds that was planted, and I will just read, I won't bother, but was planted because one of the things that Dr. King said was hate for hate's sake just results in hate and an ending to love. That hate for, so we left realizing that hating anybody. Fast forwarding, my grandmother, who was from the South, I think it was in 1977, when the 4 young Black women, girls in the high school were bombed in that church, and the world, during Sunday school, by the Klan, by a bomb planted by the Klan. And it was really hard. I mean, these were young children our age, 13, and the news all over the country and the world is that and pictures of these 4 young Black girls killed in Sunday school. And I remember being in my grandmother's kitchen crying. And she was humming You know, the African-American grandmothers, I see you shaking your head. Often the grandmothers had a hum. It didn't have no melody, but you knew how bad things were or good based on the hum. So when the hum had nothing, had, so, and in that moment, in my despair and my grief, and I said, I hate white people. And she suddenly stopped humming. And she turned around and walked to the table where I was sitting and crying. And she took my hand and she said with a fiercity I had never experienced before, she said, in this house, we don't hate anybody. And I started to say something, and she said, no, 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 you need to hear me. In this house, we don't hate anybody. And I was angry in what I wanted to say, but, you know, respectfully, had to sit and listen. What I wanted to say is that I hope that's what their parents and grandparents are telling them. That's what I would have said, because I was very angry and she knew it. But what I'm struck by in the context of planting seeds is how they get planted. That she was so angry and agitated. I never experienced her anger directed toward me in that way before or after. So I knew that something had happened. I was her only grandchild. So the how became very important. And the how for me became, I have never seen her that upset before. She has never talked to me that way before. And so the how. One of the things about growing up in San Francisco was having that kind of, you know, I had forgotten, you know, Dr. King talked about love, and in the moment of violence, I had forgotten and talked about hate. And I respect, too, my grandmother's view that she did not say to me, don't say that. She did not say to me, I don't want to hear that. What she said, and she gave me some parameters, in this house, these are the rules. And it was very, very important and powerful, the way in which that was shed. Fast forward 10 years later, Dr. King was dead. So I met him at 29. He was dead at 39. Most people who think of him think that he lived a long life. Fast forward a little more, I was in a situation where somebody one of my high school classmates was beaten up. And I realized that I couldn't stand by and watch. And I got involved in trying to attack. These were all guys fighting, but two were fighting one. And then there's me in there trying to, you know, throw some little punches. And and my you know, aunts and said, well, what were you doing? I mean, why were you doing that? You could have been hurt. You could have been. And I realized it was just this passion against violence. And that seed had also been planted. One of the things I also thought about in terms of planting seeds was, and this is more recent, I mean, 7 years ago, it was in 2007. In 2007, I traveled to Ghana to marry the man of my dreams and heart. And we traveled. He had not been to Africa. I had spent a lot of time in Africa. So we traveled to Africa to get, because I felt like we had kids, grandkids, we needed to elope. And so we traveled to Ghana to be married, and it was a beautiful ceremony and welcome home. It was, when you talk about trauma, I realized when I stepped off the plane in Ghana, and I saw all these Black people, I realized something lifted that I didn't even know I was carrying. That was the first time that I had experienced not being other, not looking different. And obviously I had borne it, but in that moment, when I stepped in the doorway of that plane and got ready and I walked around, something lifted. We were married in Ghana, and we spent a lot of time understanding about slavery and the slave journey and trauma. You know, we spent a lot of time talking. Nobody had talked to me about that in this context. And I just wanted, and one of the visits was to a slave dungeon. And it was a slave dungeon generally, and then there was the women's dungeon. And I felt the need, after I heard about the stories of the women and actually walked up the stairs that led to the governor's bedroom. And then I heard how occasionally the governor would decree, or, you know, tells the Bridward that he wanted a young woman. And that night, and how the women were responsible for her watching and cleaning and sending her up those stairs, helping prepare her to go up those stairs. And I had to, at the end of the journey, the tour of the slave dungeon, I said to my husband and everybody else, I'm sorry, I need to go back. Because I needed to go back, and I needed to sit in that slave dungeon. And I felt like it was one of the most courageous things I'd ever done. But I felt if they could endure it for 200 years, then I could go sit silently in honor of who they were. And when I left the women's dungeon, we went back to this wonderful place, and I could not stop crying. I could not stop crying. Night, day, and I was filled with hatred. And part of what Didan asked me, and I'll just read what I wrote at the time quickly to just give you an idea. From my journal on that journey, I write, as I stood looking out at the vast ocean beyond, I tried hard to imagine what reaching this spot, this door of no return, must have felt like for some long ago, unremembered African ancestor as she stood trembling on the precipice of a terrifyingly unknown and uncertain future. One of the most horrifying bits of information shared was the fact that at the height of the slave trade, there were so many dead and dying bodies tossed into the sea at this very spot, the frenzied feeding opportunity resulted in the change of the shark migration pattern along this entire bit of coast. The tears flowed uncontrollably. I sobbed as I glanced at the ocean a few feet below. It was hard to process the fact that for over 200 years, without interruption, millions of African men, women, and children had begun the long journey into slavery from spots like this. The names of the people passing through the door of return have all been erased from our historical memory. The names of the mothers and the fathers and the children and the sisters and the brothers, the babies and the aunts, the potters and the weavers, farmers and the priests and the healers, most of whom were women. The numerous slave dungeons, over 100 on the west coast of Africa, in places like Elmina and Cape Coast of Ghana and Gorée Island, are living monuments and stark reminders of our inhumane history. For a couple of days, the tears flowed uncontrollably. Can we just sit for a moment? With those women and people suffering. And I want to just, as I move toward closing, the second day of crying and hatred. I went back to where I had, as a 13-year-old, I hate white people. That's how I came out of that slave dungeon. And I couldn't stop being angry and agitated and crying. And the second day, my husband came. We're on a honeymoon. And he took my hand and he said, I need you to look at me. And in order to look at him, I had to dry the tears. And he looked at me and he held my hand. And he said, what would healing look like? And you know, when you're in the depth of despair, I'm like, healing? What? And he said, what would healing look like? Well, I wasn't ready to hear that. But the thing about the seeds, the seed had been planted. And the next morning, I remembered what the African elders had told us. They had said when they realized that we were North American, you know, we'd been stolen, now we were back. One of the things that the elder women said to us, which I only remembered in that moment of the question later, when you go into those slave dungeons, when you come out, you want to wash your feet and perform a ceremony at the nearest body of water because you do not want to walk with all that sorrow. And I had walked with all that sorrow and gotten in bed and cried and, you know, went into hatred. But the nice thing about the seed that was planted, the next morning, I got up, the ocean was just below, and I said to Didan, I need to go do a ritual washing of my feet. And he, who was just so amazing and respectful, says, well, I'm gonna just stay up here. So I walked down alone to the beach. And I could look up and I could see him, and I ceremonially washed my feet. And as I was washing my feet, I kept hearing this refrain, plant a tree, plant a tree. I mean, and it made no sense. I'm washing my feet, and this phrase, plant a tree. But I was in the space, the ceremonial space, where I was in the spiritual space to stay with it. Plant a tree, plant a tree. And then I remembered that was one of the phrases in one of Alice Walker's poems. When they torture your mother, plant a tree. When they torture your father, plant a tree. When they torture you too bad to talk, plant a tree. Now, I knew that poem well. That's why I'm on this coast, because when Alice won the Pulitzer and moved here, and we had been talking about starting a press, I moved and we started the press. So I knew that poem really well. But in that moment, what I understood was the question that we'd been holding. Not the anger, but yes, all these people have been erased, but plant trees ceremonially in honor of them. And since trees breathe for the whole, these hundreds and thousands of spirits and souls, planting trees ceremonially in their names was what we were to do. And I came up and I shared with Didan. And I just want to close, because I know that's complex, but what I've tried to do, sitting thinking about my beloved friend, what in this moment can I say? And what impacted me? And how have I tried to pass it on? And what is my role as an elder now to share? And I will close with bringing him back into the room with a poem by Didan, which many of you have heard. I am old and wise as the night. I am as beautiful as a bird in flight. I am the moon and the sea. I am the robin and the bee. I'm the soil and the tree. I'm the lion and the gazelle. I am heaven and I am hell. I am the ring and I am the bell. I am the joy and I am the tear. I am the brave and I am the fear. I'm the blistering desert. I'm the freezing snow. I'm the cringing coward and the gentle hero. I'm the aged and I'm the young. I'm the weak and I'm the strong. I'm the smile and I'm the frown. I'm the pauper and I am the crown. I am the wrong and I am the right. I am the day and I am the night. I am now and I am never. I am yesterday and I am forever. I am the bitter and I am the sweet. I live on the hill and I live on the street. I am the top and I am the bottom. I am Martin, Hitler, Gandhi, and Sodom. I am red, black, yellow, brown, and white. I love, hate, laugh, cry, and fight. All the universe is reflected in me. I'm all that ever was and ever will be. When I lose, it's the lesson that I win. Judging others is my sin. So I want to thank you, my dear precious one, for the invitation to rethink and to think and to share what I've shared.